Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. It's only a matter of time before the Omicron variant is detected in Washington. There's a good chance it's already here. But don't panic. We're focusing on the science with a UW virologist who's been keeping an eye out for variants since the start of the pandemic. That's right after some news. The first U.S. case of the Omicron variant has already turned up in a patient in California yesterday. Another case reported in British Columbia. State health officials say,
don't be surprised when you get a positive case somewhere, and don't be surprised if you get a positive case of Omicron variant here in the state of Washington. Again, not a time to panic. It is what it is.
Health Secretary Umair Shah says the plan hasn't changed. Vaccines, booster shots, masks, and tests are the main ways to prevent transmission. A new audit of SPD's disciplinary policies says there's some room for improvement. The city's Office of the Inspector General says it didn't find any major lapses in accountability, but did identify some gaps. Among them, discipline tended to be on the low end. A person filing a complaint rarely gets to discuss it with the chief, and suspensions aren't consistently served. The report makes 11 recommendations to tighten things up. And a helicopter flight over majestic Snoqualmie Falls might sound like a fun tourist trip, but the Snoqualmie tribe would like to see less of it. The tribe says despite speaking with tour operators, it's seen more unregulated and low-flying helicopters over the 270-foot waterfall, which is a sacred site on ancestral tribal lands. They're asking the feds to impose some restrictions and residents to file complaints with the FAA. The Delta variant is still what's driving this pandemic, but the new Omicron variant showing up around the world is now a variant of concern. The first U.S. case has just been found in California in a person who had traveled to South Africa. They're vaccinated, but not boosted, and having mild symptoms. Virologists around the world are on the lookout for Omicron, including scientists here in Seattle. Pavitra Roychoudhury is an acting instructor with UW Medicine, also with Fred Hutch. She's been sequencing genomes since the start of the pandemic. Pavitra, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're real busy.
Thank you for having me.
So Omicron. Just been found in California. There's also a reported case in BC. This leads me, citizen scientist, to believe it's probably here in Washington as well, right?
Yes, I think that is what most people believe to be the case, that it is likely already here, probably at low frequency, and that it's only a matter of time before it will be picked up in multiple states.
When do you expect to find it?
It's tough to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if, we found it within the next week or so.
Okay, all right. So you go to work every day and do this thing called genomic sequencing, which helps scientists like yourself track changes in this virus. Can you just give me a sketch of what genomic sequencing is and tell me what you're looking for?
Yeah, sure. So I work at the University of Washington Virology Lab that's been testing and sequencing samples for SARS-CoV-2 since the start of the pandemic. And, once you have a positive test for COVID-19, the next thing you want to know is what is the variant or the sequence of the virus in that sample. So I lead a team of researchers who take these positive samples and perform a series of wet lab and computational steps that allow us to go from the original sample to obtaining the sequence of letters that make up this virus's genome. And from the sequence of letters that make up the genome, you can then look at the various mutations across the genome that allow you to determine what variant it is.
So you're just looking for variations for something you already know exists. And when you see something different, you know the virus is doing something different. Omicron has been called a variant of concern. What is concerning about it? And what are scientists seeing right now that is different from other variants that we've seen?
I think what was unusual about this particular variant was just the sheer number of mutations that it bore in its genome. And some of those mutations were mutations that we had seen in other variants of concern, like the Alpha variant and the Delta variant. So just the sheer number, as well as the number of those mutations that are in the spike gene that codes for the protein that the immune system sees when you get infected with this virus. So that was the first sign that there was something unusual about this particular variant. And add to that the fact that in South Africa, where a number of cases had been sequenced, that this mutation was in such a large proportion of cases. That was the other thing that was quite concerning. However, it remains to be seen. There's so many open questions, as I'm sure you've seen, that how transmissible is it? And importantly, how does it fare against the prevailing variant, which is Delta, which is in over 99.9% of sequences in our lab, at least, and that is the case in many labs around the world.
And one of the biggest questions, how is this going to work with vaccines? What does Omicron mean for vaccines?
Exactly. Yeah. And so by determining the sequences of these samples, determining how many of them are the Omicron variant, and then sharing that data to public repositories and also with public health, that allows us to put the sequence data in combination with epidemiological data like vaccination status, illness status, hospitalization, and so on, as well as geographic data about where these cases are located, travel history, etc., and put together a complete picture of what is actually happening with regards to the dynamics of the variant in the population.
And of course, one of the things I keep hearing again is that this variant had a fairly good home inside an unvaccinated person, and that is where it was able to replicate and mutate so successfully.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hypotheses that is being put forward. Everyone wants to know, well, where did this particular variant come from? How is it that it arose all of a sudden with so many mutations, rather than seeing these mutations accumulate over time? And so it was surprising, and so people have been speculating on what might be the potential origin of this variant. I don't think we have firm answers just yet, but one of the hypotheses is that this may have replicated for a long time in a single infected person, potentially somebody who's immunocompromised, because we do see this sort of thing happening where there's an accumulation of mutations in an individual who continues to have this virus for a long time. So that's one of the hypotheses, but we haven't actually found that individual. So it's hard to say for sure.
I wonder if this is just going to keep happening. Should we expect more and more mutations?
I think that obviously we're not done with this virus and it's not done with us. And we do expect to see the virus continue to evolve over time and face this changing landscape of vaccination, of travel, of, interactions between people and so on. So I think we can expect to see variants arise. What really matters is ensuring that as many people are vaccinated as possible and that the vaccines continue to work effectively in preventing severe disease and hospitalizations, which as of now, they do appear to be doing that job quite well.
I'm curious what you think the best and worst case scenario is for this variant.
I think that in the best case, maybe it's a variant that had a lot of geographic spread in South Africa, but upon arrival here, it doesn't really compete with Delta and kind of fizzles out like some other variants have done. For example, the Mu variant, which caused pretty severe outbreaks in some parts of the world, but here in the US didn't really take off. So that's one possible trajectory. I guess the worst case scenario would probably be that this variant is not responding to the vaccines that we have currently available, or that it causes quite severe disease even among the vaccinated. And that would be the absolute worst case scenario. And I'm really hoping that that isn't the case, but I guess it remains to be seen. It's too early to say for sure.
I just can't believe that nearly 2 years since we've started thinking about the coronavirus, we are now dealing with a mutation that we are unsure of. It's just, to stop and think about it for a minute is stunning.
It is stunning. And I think that, many experts who think about these sequences and analyze sequences from across the globe, not just for SARS-CoV-2, but other viruses, have warned that, this is something we have to get used to. We have to just, think about it just like we get our flu vaccine each year, then perhaps, we should think about protecting ourselves each year, and we expect to see these kinds of surges and times where it's not so bad, and then it picks up again, and then you redesign vaccines and so on and so forth. So I think it's a new reality that we all have to get accustomed to, but I think that over time we've developed a lot of wonderful tools to help us to monitor the variant, to protect ourselves through various, pharmaceutical interventions, non-pharmaceutical interventions, and so on.
Pavitra Roychoudhury, really appreciate your work. Thank you for doing the hard job of the sequencing and for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks. Again, we see our lab as part of this global team effort in combating the pandemic. So we're glad to be able to help.
Pavitra Roychoudhury is acting instructor with UW Medicine, also with Fred Hutch. Thanks for listening. Jason Pagano produced today's show. Our producers are Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Diana Opong, and Jenny Cecil Moore. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy.